So the last thing we want to take a look at here is we talk about the build-up to the American Civil War. The first day we talked about looking at the Louisiana Purchase and how every time new territories applied for statehood, that reinvigorated the argument over slavery. We talked about how the Missouri Compromise addressed the problem of statehood. In the United States Senate, we had to have an even number of slave states and free states, and the Missouri Compromise achieved that. Yesterday, we took a look at the situation of Texas and how this further complicates the problem. We talked about how the United States acquired Texas after Texas was initially a part of the Mexican territory. We talked about how the Mexican government intentionally lured Americans into Texas with lucrative trade opportunities and low taxes. And we discussed how when the dictator Santa Anna took control of Mexican government, Santa Anna intentionally tried to take advantage of those Texans, which ultimately led to the Texas War for Independence. Where we left off yesterday, Texas won their war for independence not because their military was strong and they earned their independence from Mexico. Rather, they won their independence because Sam Houston captured Santa Anna and held him as ransom for their independence. When Texas won their independence, they assumed the United States was going to annex them and they just simply become part of the United States of America. The problem with that policy was that if the United States had annexed Texas, this would have been another territory that would have reinvigorated the issue of slavery, and it probably was going to start a war between the United States and Mexico that would cost a lot of money that the United States was not willing to spend at the time. And so when the Texans won their independence, initially we refused to annex them. But in true Texas fashion, they threatened to then rival the United States, conquer more territory, create their own new cotton kingdom that would rival the United States. And so where we left off yesterday, the United States had just acquired Texas. And this leaves us on the doorstep of a possible war with Mexico. And so when this happened, like anticipated, the Mexicans had a serious problem with this. When the United States government eventually annexed Texas, there was a dispute between the United States and Mexico over what the true border of Texas was. Texans argued that the border between Mexico and Texas was the Rio Grande River. Mexicans argued that it was the Nueces River, which is considerably further north of the Rio Grande. If the United States had accepted the Texas boundary, that would have given us more land, more property, more cotton growing land, and so we accepted that property. There was a dispute between the two countries that ultimately led to a staged invasion of the Mexican government that ultimately got the United States into a war between the United States and Mexico. In the end, the discussion of the Mexican-American War is a relatively short one. The war was not long. It did last longer than everybody anticipated, but it was not a difficult victory for the United States. We didn't win the Mexican War because we were so superior militarily to Mexico. We did win, though, because by the time we fought them, the Mexican government was severely weakened by the dictatorship of Santa Anna. And between the United States as well as the rebellion of people who were already living in Mexico, people who were living in territories like California, people who were living in Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, the people living in these regions rebelled against the Mexican government as the United States was already attacking them. And the combination of these two things led to a relatively easy victory for the United States. And when the Mexican-American War was over, a couple of things happened. One, many Americans had gotten their first combat experience, this next generation of American fighters. People like Ulysses Grant, Robert E. Lee, George McClellan, some of these leaders who are going to fight Stonewall Jackson. Some of these guys who were going to fight later on in the American Civil War got their first combat experience down in Mexico fighting the Mexicans. And more importantly, when the war is over, the United States acquired all of that territory. We now have Texas, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and California. These are all territories that are now going to belong to the United States. In fact, after the Mexican-American War was over, there was even a debate over whether or not the United States should just take all of Mexico, all the way down to the final southern Mexican border. But once again, the debate was, if we acquire all of this territory, what happens to it? And there was a massive movement that was starting to build in the United States of people who were trying to reduce and slowly outlaw the spread of slavery. We call this the Free Soil Movement. And after the Mexican, and once again, as we're looking at these collection of events that are slowly leading us towards the American Civil War, after the Louisiana Purchase, in 1820, you have the Missouri Compromise. How do we deal with this new territory and the issue of slavery? Then we annex Texas. The question is, does slavery extend there? Everybody assumes it's going to, but it's not a big problem because Texas is south of that 3630 line. Then after the Mexican-American War, we acquire California, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. The question was even whether or not to take all of Mexico, and the question was, is it going to be a slave territory? And this movement, we call it the Free Soil Movement. These were people who said that if the United States is going to continue to expand, any new territory that the government purchases or annexes should not include slavery. There were people in the Democratic Party as well as the Whig Party that agreed with this movement. And as time progressed and the debate in Congress became more intense between Northerners, Democrats as well as Whigs, and Southerners over whether or not these new territories should include slavery, eventually the Whig Party disbanded, the Democratic Party became weaker, and this is where we see the foundation of a new political party. So, when we're taking a look at these events that are making our way towards the American Civil War, the annexation of Texas and the Mexican-American War play a very important role for two reasons. One, when the war was over, we acquire all this territory, and the question is, what do we do with that territory? Is it for slave or free? And two, that debate over slavery led to the creation of the Republican Party as we know it today. From that moment forward, the two political parties in the United States are the Democrats. That Democratic Party that was founded by Andrew Jackson is the same Democratic Party we have today. And after the Mexican-American War and we acquired all that territory, the Republican Party that is created is the same Republican Party that Donald Trump leads today in the United States.